She was just a child, barefoot, silent, and clutching a sign that read, "Will code for food." Most people walked past her without a second glance. But one man, a single father with a past he never spoke of, stopped. And that moment, it didn't just change her life. It brought an entire system to its knees and stunned a CEO who thought she had seen everything. Before we begin this extraordinary, true-to-life story of redemption, hidden genius, and a love that quietly rewrote everything, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us sometimes miracles wear worn-out shoes and whisper in binary. Now, let me take you to Dustwell. The town of Dustwell wasn't much to look at. A faded speck on the Oregon map, it sat half-forgotten between timber hills and miles of copper-colored fields. A railroad once ran through its heart, but now only the wind did sometimes with the howl of something lost. At the edge of town, just past the flickering sign of the Hollow, a bar-turned-tech-infused startup experiment, Lucan Hayes pushed an old mop bucket across the scuffed wood floor. He moved without noise, without hurry. He always did. At 38, Lucan looked like someone who had once tried to outrun life and failed somewhere along the road. His sandy blonde hair had grown longer in recent years, tied back carelessly now. The lines on his face weren't just from age, but from holding in things no one ever asked about. Few in Dustwell knew that Lucan had once written code for the Department of Defense, that he'd stood on stages at security conferences, his name whispered with respect in rooms full of bright minds. Even fewer knew why he'd left it all behind. Every night after putting his asthmatic son to sleep, Lucan slipped into the Hollow to clean after the tech guys in business suits. The place was odd for Dustwell, a fusion of rustic wood beams and fiber-optic ambition. It was the brainchild of a company looking to revitalize forgotten towns through innovation. Most locals didn't understand what they were doing with cloud-based POS analytics. Lucan didn't care. He swept mopped-cleaned keyboards sticky with spilled IPAs. That was enough. Tonight, as he pushed open the back door to take out the trash, the bitter wind bit through his flannel shirt. He nearly missed the figure crouched by the dumpster, small, thin, unmoving. Then she turned. A girl. Maybe 10. Freckles under dirt. Tangled brown curls. Her hoodie was 2 sizes too big and soaked through at the sleeves. She looked at him with eyes that were too old for her age. Not frightened. Not ashamed. Just tired. Lucan paused, letting silence hang like breath in the cold. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said gently. "I'm not stealing." "I'm just looking," she replied, voice firm but hoarse. She held up a bent piece of cardboard like a badge. Scrawled on it in Sharpie were the words, "We'll fix computers for food." Lucan blinked, the cold suddenly forgotten. He looked down at the sandwich he'd wrapped in wax paper earlier and hadn't touched. Wordlessly, he held it out. The girl hesitated, then took it with both hands and sat cross-legged on the concrete. She didn't eat fast, just deliberately, like someone who'd learned that chewing too quickly made the next meal feel even further away. "What's your name?" Lucan asked, crouching to her level. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "Evie. Evie Quinn. No last name." She shrugged. "Sometimes I use different ones. Depends who's asking." Lucan offered a faint smile. "I'm Lucan. You own this place." He chuckled. "Just clean it. But you knew the model of that server when you walked by earlier?" she said, nodding toward the open back office window. Lucan raised an eyebrow. "Intel. Xeon E2224, 32GB RAM. Dual hot swaps. I saw you glance at it. Then you frowned." Lucan blinked. You noticed that Evie smirked. Noticed the configuration, too. "I've been watching. They're routing unsecured traffic through a legacy switch. Might want to tell someone before it bites them." Lucan exhaled slowly. This wasn't normal small talk. This girl was different. "Where are you staying, Evie?" "Behind the gas station. There's a camper no one uses. It leaks, but it's dry under the table. She said it like reciting a weather report. Neutral. Distant. Lucan looked at her for a long moment. The protective instinct in him buried since his wife's death stirred uneasily. Cold Evie gave a lopsided shrug. Only on the outside. Lucan took off his jacket and handed it to her. She tried to resist, but he just nodded once, and she gave in. The sleeves dangled past her hands. "I'm not a charity case," she muttered. "I know," he replied. "You're a technician with a sandwich." That made her snort softly, a sound like something breaking and healing at the same time. Inside, Lucan poured her a cup of cocoa from the staff machine. As steam curled upward, Evie eyed the array of servers humming along the wall. "I could fix that load balancing issue, you know," she said, matter-of-factly. "I believe you," Lucan answered, then added, "Maybe tomorrow." Evie looked up at him sharply. "You're letting me stay." He nodded once, just for the night, and just inside where it's warm. For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But less resistance. That night, long after Evie fell asleep, curled in a booth under Lucan's jacket, he sat outside with a cup of coffee gone cold. He stared into the dark, the flicker of neon catching on his weary features. Once Lucan Hayes had been called a genius. Once he had stood on stages. But tonight, watching over a child who spoke the language of machines as easily as breath, he realized something he hadn't in years. Some code can't be written, only felt. And maybe he wasn't done writing after all. Morning in Dustwell arrived slowly, like it too was reluctant to start again. The sky had barely warmed to gray when Lucan unlocked the side door of the hollow and stepped inside. He carried 2 breakfast sandwiches wrapped in foil and still warm, and a pair of mittens he'd found in a donation bin outside the pharmacy. Not much, but better than nothing. Evie was exactly where he'd left her, curled up on the corner booth under his jacket, one arm clutching it like a promise. Her thin legs were drawn up and the hood of her oversized sweatshirt had fallen back, revealing a face no child should wear. A face too still, too alert, even in sleep. Lucan set the food down quietly, careful not to wake her. But she stirred anyway. Eyes opened fast-trained like someone used to having to protect herself before fully awake. "It's just me," he said softly. Evie blinked a few times, then sat up, rubbing one eye. Her voice was scratchy with sleep. "You always bring breakfast." "Only for visiting prodigies," Lucan replied. That drew a faint smile, the same half-guarded one as last night. She sniffed the air. "Egg and cheese. Double bacon. I figured genius needs protein." Evie didn't wait for more persuasion. She unwrapped the sandwich like it was a gift, then tore into it with quiet precision. Lucan watched her, a flicker of memory tightening in his chest. His son, Noah, doing the same thing after school, when they were still a family of 3. She finished eating in silence, then wiped her fingers on her jeans. "Thanks. You're welcome." A pause. Evie stared at the glowing server racks across the room. The low hum seemed to pull at her. "Why'd you help me?" she asked. Lucan leaned back against the edge of the booth. "Because someone once helped me. And because I think we speak the same language." Evie looked at him. Really looked. "You used to write code." Lucan nodded. "For who?" he hesitated. "Government mostly. A few agencies with long acronyms. Some security firms. Some contracts I can't talk about." Evie's eyes lit with curiosity. Encryption, among other things. She tilted her head. "Why'd you stop?" Lucan stared at the far wall. His voice lower now. "My wife got sick. I walked away to take care of her. After she passed, I didn't see the point in going back." There was no pity in Evie's face, just understanding. She seemed to carry her own share of ghosts. "I ran once too," she said. Lucan didn't ask from what. He figured if she ever wanted to tell him, she would. Later that morning, when staff began trickling in mostly sleepy tech guys and hipster baristas, Evie vanished into the storage room at Lucan's nod. He knew she didn't want to be seen. Not yet. As he swept near the bar, Lucan overheard the crew lead a jittery man named Bradley swearing at his tablet. POS system's still glitching. God, I thought the update last night fixed. This Lucan paused. Still giving you checksum errors, Bradley blinked. How'd you know that? Lucan smiled faintly. Call it an old instinct. That afternoon, Evie asked for a screwdriver and access to the back-end router. Lucan handed her both without question. 30 minutes later, she emerged from the server room and handed him a post-it with a list of vulnerabilities. Lucan scanned it, eyebrows lifting. You noticed all this? Just by looking. She shrugged. It talks to me. That evening, Lucan brought Evie a worn-out laptop he'd dug up from storage. She flipped it open, poked at the insides, then grinned. This is junk, she said. But it's your junk, he replied. Fix it. Make it better. She looked at him like he'd handed her something more valuable than gold. Maybe he had. 3 nights passed. Each one Evie returned like clockwork, always quiet, always curious. She worked on the laptop, tapped into the network, and explored data security like a child wandering a familiar forest. Lucan couldn't help but admire her. Her intuition was unnerving. She didn't just understand systems, she felt them. It reminded him of himself years ago, before the burnout, before the heartbreak. But she was also just a child, curled on the floor, occasionally muttering to herself, her feet swinging under the table while she cracked into dummy firewalls like puzzles. Then one evening, just after closing, Lucan's phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. One word, audit. He froze. Clarabelle Vance was coming. The CEO, the Ice Queen. Lucan hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since she took over the Hollow project. Brilliant, unapproachable, and rumored to be heartless, she had a reputation for slashing teams and closing branches without warning, and now she was coming to Dustwell. Evie peeked up from behind the counter. Who's Clarabelle? Lucan sighed, rubbing his temple. She's the reason this place exists, and the reason it might not tomorrow. Evie considered that, then smiled, this time with mischief. Then maybe we should give her a reason to stay. Lucan raised an eyebrow, like what Evie's eyes gleamed, like solving the problem no one else can. Lucan looked at her, really looked, and something inside him, something old, sharp and dormant, began to stir. Maybe they were about to do more than fix some broken code. Maybe they were about to rewrite everything. Clarabelle Vance stepped off the small charter plane with the precision of someone used to arriving unannounced and making people nervous when she did. Dustwell's private airstrip was little more than a stretch of cracked tarmac, flanked by leaning pine trees. The air smelled of dry grass and engine oil. She disliked both. The driver waiting with a handwritten sign looked up too slowly. Clarabelle took the keys from him before he could fumble a greeting and slid into the driver's seat herself. She didn't like chauffeurs, or waiting, or people who assumed she needed help. She hadn't always been this way. But after 20 years in boardrooms where silence was punished and uncertainty devoured, she'd learned that softness cost too much. Still, as the rental sedan rolled into the town she'd signed off on 2 years ago as part of her Tech in Small Spaces initiative, something inside her twisted. Dustwell looked like a place left behind by time and hope, which she supposed made it a perfect match for her. Inside the Hollow, Lucan stood at the sink, elbows deep in soapy water, when the door opened. He didn't look up. We're closed till 4. I'm not here for the IPA, said a cool female voice. Lucan froze. The sound of that voice pulled at memories he'd boxed up long ago, memories of meetings, emails signed with a C, and the occasional late-night call that ended, not with goodbyes, but silence. He turned slowly. Clarabelle Vance stood in the doorway, her dark blazer sharp against the warm tones of the bar's rustic interior. Her golden hair was pulled into a low twist, and her expression was unreadable. But her eyes were tired. Not in the way of someone lacking sleep, but of someone who'd grown used to disappointment. Clarabelle, he said, his voice a half step behind his thoughts. Lucan. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 3 years. The last time had been across a glass conference room table in D.C., where she was pitching a new tech project, and he was walking out of a world he once ruled. Now she was here in the most unexpected of places. I didn't expect to find you still in the code, she said, after a pause. I'm not, Lucan replied, just in the cleanup. Clarabelle's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. You always were better with back doors than front doors. Still am, he said. Only now I mop up messes instead of systems. Something flickered across her face. Not pity. Something more complicated. Regret, maybe. Or memory. Evie, who had been quietly eavesdropping from the side hallway, chose that moment to walk in with her rebuilt laptop under one arm. She stopped short at the sight of Clarabelle, then adjusted her hoodie like a soldier preparing for battle. Clarabelle turned. Her eyes dropped to the girl's bare ankles, her patched jeans the wary tilt of her chin. Who's this? Lucan spoke before Evie could. She's helping me. Clarabelle narrowed her eyes. Helping you, how Evie answered flatly. Fixing your servers. You've got 6 exposed ports, a misconfigured firewall, and a security loop on your API gateway that's practically begging someone to steal credentials. Clarabelle blinked. Lucan watched her carefully. If she dismissed Evie now, he'd know she hadn't changed. But if she listened, Clarabelle looked back at the girl. Show me. They gathered in the back office, where the hum of machines filled the room like mechanical breath. Evie sat at the terminal typing with swift certainty. Clarabelle hovered behind her, skeptical at first, then visibly intrigued. As Evie pulled up the vulnerable endpoints and walked them through a live demonstration, Clarabelle's arms slowly lowered from their crossed stance. When the girl finished, Clarabelle turned to Lucan. She did all this, Lucan nodded. In under an hour. Clarabelle was silent. Then softly, she reminds me of someone. Lucan tilted his head. Someone you used to be. Clarabelle's gaze snapped to him. For a moment, the CEO mask cracked. My sister, she said finally. Lily. She was gifted, but fragile. Lucan didn't speak. He'd known about Lily. The girl who'd vanished one winter from their family cabin, never found. It was one of the things Clarabelle never talked about. Until now. That evening, Clarabelle didn't return to her hotel. She stayed behind after the tech team arrived, issuing instructions, and watching Evie work in stunned silence. Lucan noticed how her eyes softened when Evie explained something, how her jaw unclenched when Lucan brought her coffee without asking. Later, Clarabelle joined Lucan out back near the dumpster, where he'd first met Evie. The air was crisp, the stars faint above Dustwell's aging rooftops. You were always good at finding what others missed, she said. So were you, Lucan replied. But you started measuring everything in decimal points instead of people. Clarabelle turned to him. People let me down. Lucan met her gaze. Not all of us. A long silence stretched between them, rich with things unsaid. Back inside, Evie was curled in the corner booth hoodie, pulled up laptop, humming faintly beside her. She looked like a child, and something far older, all at once. Clarabelle watched her sleep for a moment, then whispered, She doesn't belong out there. Lucan answered quietly, She never did. And in that moment something shifted, not just between Clarabelle and Lucan, but inside Clarabelle herself. Something she'd locked away long ago cracked open just a little. It didn't hurt. It just felt like air returning to a room long sealed. The crash didn't come with a bang. It came quietly, like most things that ruin everything. It started with a flicker, a blink of the overhead lights at the hollow, a slight delay on a payment screen. Then the music, always streaming, always curated, cut off mid-chord. Evie looked up, first her eyes narrowing. She tapped her laptop. Nothing. No network, no handshake, no ping. Lucan was stacking glasses behind the bar. He caught her expression and froze. Clarabelle, seated at a table reviewing reports, lifted her head at the same moment her phone buzzed. She scanned the screen. Her face hardened. Urgent. All Hollow terminals offline. Access denied. Client credentials wiped. A second message followed multiple breach attempts. Origin unknown. Estimated loss, 92% operational data. Evie stood up slowly. It started. Lucan's voice was calm but clipped. What if she didn't look away from the screen? Someone's inside. And they're not poking around this time. Clarabelle was already moving. We need to shut everything down. Kill the routers. Isolate the servers. Evie shook her head. Too late. They're already in the control hub. If you sever the connection now, they'll encrypt everything before you finish pulling the plugs. Lucan crossed the room to the back office. Then we stopped them from inside. The server room was a furnace of blinking lights and rising tension. Cables snaked across the floor like veins. The hum had turned into a tremor, barely perceptible, but unnerving. Clarabelle barked into her headset. Get me the Dallas security lead. Tell them to reroute critical logs to my private node, no now. Evie sat at the command console, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Her lips were pressed into a line, her eyes scanning raw code, like they were reading a familiar language in a different alphabet. Lucan stood behind her arms, folded eyes narrowing. They're not just in the payment systems, Evie muttered. They're touching user data, communications, HR. Someone's mapping your entire framework. Clarabelle's face went pale. Internal Evie shook her head. No. But someone used to be internal. They knew your system before you hardened it. Lucan stepped forward. Can you trace the bridge? Maybe. But I'll need access to the sandbox node behind the firewall. She turned. The one no one was supposed to know about. Clarabelle blinked. How do you? Evie didn't answer. She was already typing. 15 minutes in the silence in the server room was electric. Outside, the bar was locked down. Techs and baristas alike had been told to go home. Only the three of them remained. Evie's fingers danced across the keyboard, like a musician finding the soul of a broken instrument. Lucan stood beside her, eyes flicking across the scrolling lines. I see it, he murmured suddenly. There. Line 2783. They're creating a recursive loop to spoof admin permissions. Evie leaned closer. Good eye. Give me 30 seconds. Clarabelle hovered behind them. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a CEO. She felt like someone waiting on a miracle. Then the screens went black. All of them. Even Evie's. Clarabelle gasped. What happened? Lucan's fingers moved faster than his thoughts. Hard wipe attempt. They knew we saw them. Evie's voice was calm. I can stop it. But I need you both to trust me. Lucan didn't hesitate. What do you need? She looked up, eyes suddenly vulnerable. Your login key. The one from your DoD clearance days. I know you still have it, Clarabelle snapped. You gave a child military-level access. He didn't, Evie said. But I watched him use the command console. I saw the string. I memorized it. Lucan's voice was low. I kept it to protect one thing, my son. You better know what you're doing, Evie. She nodded once, then typed in the key. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then everything lit up. Evie's screen returned with an override panel. Lucan's ID blinked in the corner. System rollback initiated. Clarabelle's jaw dropped as line after line of encrypted code was forced into reverse. Firewalls reestablished. Ports sealed. Logs rerouted and resecured. Within 5 minutes, the hollow system had reassembled itself like a broken heart stitching back together. Evie leaned back in her chair, exhausted. They're out. And I locked the door behind them. Lucan let out a slow breath. What did you do? I taught the system to recognize intent, she said. It doesn't just see behavior now. It understands pattern deviation, decision tree aggression, and anomalies in rhythm. Clarabelle stared. You rewrote our behavioral protocol on a borrowed laptop. Evie looked down at her feet. I just listened. Systems talk when no one interrupts. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Lucan spoke, quiet and reverent. You saved it. You saved all of it. Clarabelle didn't say anything at first. Then she stepped forward, knelt beside Evie's chair, and placed a hand over the girl's. You didn't just save the system, she said. You saved me. Evie's voice cracked a little. I didn't know you needed saving. Clarabelle gave a faint smile. Neither did I. That night, after the logs were secure and the doors locked, Lucan found Clarabelle sitting alone in the booth, where Evie had first fallen asleep. She's not ordinary, Clarabelle said softly. No, Lucan agreed. But neither are you. Clarabelle looked up, and something in her face had changed, like the hard edge had softened just enough for warmth to slip through. You always saw things I couldn't, she said. Lucan replied. Maybe I just looked longer. Outside, Evie stared up at the stars, her hoodie pulled tight, her hands deep in Lucan's jacket pockets. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but tonight she'd stopped something terrible and been seen for it. Really seen. For the first time, maybe ever. And in the quiet hum of the town below, she smiled. The next morning, the town of Dustwell woke up, as it always did, slowly without ceremony. But inside the hollow, everything had changed. The system was back online, cleaner and tighter than ever. The cyber attack that had nearly gutted the bar's infrastructure now lived only in logs and backup files. The tech staff, those who hadn't fled in panic the night before, milled around with a mixture of awe and confusion, whispering about the kid and that guy from the night shift who called the breach pattern before it happened. Lucan has always said little. He was at the sink again, sleeves rolled, washing last night's mugs, like the world hadn't tilted slightly. But his eyes were different, sharper, clearer, like a fog had lifted. Evie sat nearby, her borrowed laptop open, typing silently with jam-covered fingers. She was eating toast with one hand, coding with the other. She didn't ask permission anymore. She didn't need to. And Clarabelle. She stood at the center of it all, like a storm that had passed, but hadn't quite faded. Her usual authority was still there, shoulders squared, hair tight, clipboard balanced, but something subtle had shifted. She smiled when she looked at Evie now, and she didn't flinch when Lucan caught her watching him. That afternoon, as sunlight poured through the front windows and the coffee machine hissed in the corner, Clarabelle called a private staff meeting. Only 3 people were in attendance, herself, Lucan, and Evie. She cleared her throat and looked over her notes, though she didn't need them. I reviewed the security logs this morning, she began, and I don't think I need to tell either of you what we avoided last night. Lucan leaned back in his chair. A lawsuit. A collapsed Clarabelle gave a tight smile. Both. She turned to Evie. What you did in that server room, it was beyond remarkable. You outpaced a team of seasoned engineers using a machine with a cracked screen and borrowed code. Evie looked down. I didn't do it alone. Clarabelle blinked. What do you mean? The girl tilted her head toward Lucan. He spotted the exploit loop before I did. Gave me the space to work, stood between me and everyone's panic. He made it possible. Lucan shifted uncomfortably. She's giving me too much credit. Clarabelle's eyes didn't leave him. No, she's not. Silence settled for a beat. Then Clarabelle spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I've always built systems, networks, companies. But I forgot that the most powerful frameworks aren't digital. They're human. The way you two work together, it's something rare. Evie didn't say anything. She was watching Clarabelle the way a stray watches an open door, ready to run but curious. Clarabelle turned to her again. I want to offer you something. Not charity. Not pity. A choice. She placed a folder on the table. Inside was a scholarship application. A place at one of the most prestigious mentorship programs for underage developers in the country. Evie's fingers hovered above the cover. Why Clarabelle hesitated. Because I see in you what I saw in someone once. Someone who never got the chance. Evie looked up, eyes narrowing. Your sister Clarabelle nodded. She was bright. Brilliant even. But fragile. The world didn't make space for her, and I didn't know how to fight for her until it was too late. Evie ran her fingers along the folder's edge, then whispered, I'm not fragile. Clarabelle smiled, soft, but certain. I know. After the meeting, Lucan lingered behind. Clarabelle was sipping tea, now seated in the booth Evie had claimed as her own. She watched Lucan approach with a guarded expression, but not cold. Don't thank me, he said. You gave her more than a chance. You gave her dignity. Clarabelle set her cup down. She gave it to herself. I just stopped getting in the way. They sat in silence a moment, the kind that didn't require filling. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring leaves along the dusty street. Lucan broke the quiet. You still run from things. Clarabelle didn't answer at first. Then no. I bury them now. It feels more efficient. Lucan chuckled low and warm. That sounds like you. She looked at him, then really looked. You were always different from the rest of them, she said, even when you had a badge and a team of 10 behind you. You saw things sideways, felt them before the rest of us could define them. Lucan shrugged. Didn't save me much. Clarabelle shook her head. Maybe not. But it saved her. And maybe it can save me too. Lucan looked at her a long moment. Then quietly, do you want to be saved? That caught her off guard. She didn't answer, but her eyes didn't harden either. They stayed right where they were, open, searching. That evening, Evie sat at the bar counter with Noah, Lucan's son, who had come in after his school session with a sketchbook under one arm. The two talked in hushed tones, Evie explaining how networks were like tree branches, Noah drawing a diagram that looked vaguely like a jellyfish. Clarabelle stood near the doorway, coat in hand, watching the pair. Lucan approached. You don't have to go, he said. Clarabelle looked at him. I do. But I think I want to come back. Lucan offered a smile, small and sincere. You know where to find us. She turned to leave, then stopped. Lucan, she said. Yeah, she hesitated. 5 minutes. 3 screens. That's all it took to change everything. He nodded. It always is. Just enough time. Just enough space. Then she was gone. And Lucan stood in the fading light of the bar, a man who had spent years in the shadows of memory, finally feeling something shift toward the sun. It had rained in the early hours, leaving the sidewalks dark and glistening, the air still holding the weight of what had passed through. Dustwell smelled like damp cedar and coffee that morning, strange familiar comforts. Lucan stood behind the counter of the hollow polishing mugs, more out of habit than necessity. The system had held through the night, humming smoothly beneath layers of Evie's reworked code. The emergency was over. But something inside him wasn't settling. He glanced across the room to where Evie sat by the front window, her feet tucked under her, a sketchbook open in her lap. She wasn't coding. She was drawing. That more than anything told Lucan the crash had left a mark. She was sketching machines, not perfect technical diagrams, but softened versions, as if she were translating the heart of a system into something even a child might understand. Lucan knew what that meant. He had done the same once in a different life, back when code was poetry and solving a problem felt like breathing. Evie looked up and caught him watching. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. After a moment, she said, "They only talk when it's quiet." Lucan dried his hands. "The machines," Evie nodded, flipping a page in her sketchbook. "They don't like noise. Noise is distraction. Noise is people pretending." Lucan walked over, pulling up a chair. "You think people pretend a lot?" Evie's pencil hovered over the page. "More than they should. But you don't. You're quiet on purpose." Lucan chuckled softly. "You're observant." "You're honest," she replied, then added more softly, "That's rare." Later that day, Clarabelle returned. No formal entrance this time. No heels, no clipboard. Just a pair of soft leather boots, dark jeans, and a look in her eyes that said she hadn't quite figured out why she was back, only that she needed to be. Lucan was the first to notice her. He didn't speak, just nodded toward the empty stool beside Evie's booth. Clarabelle took it. Evie didn't look up from her sketchbook right away. Then, without lifting her head, she asked, "Why did you come back?" Clarabelle didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window where rainwater shimmered in the gutter. "Because I wanted to know what happens when the noise stops." Evie blinked. Then slowly she turned her sketchbook toward Clarabelle. It showed a machine, tall, slender, humming with light. Wires trailed from its heart like vines, but none of them were plugged into anything. It stood alone. "I used to feel like this," Evie said. "Always on, always scanning, but not connected." Clarabelle stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Me too." That afternoon, Clarabelle stayed. Not to lead, not to give orders, but to help. She swept the floor, took inventory of supplies, even helped Noah with his math homework when Lucan ran an errand. Lucan returned to find the three of them seated at a back table. Clarabelle cross-legged with a calculator, Evie watching with something like disbelief, and Noah laughing at some inside joke neither adult could quite decode. Lucan stood at the doorway a moment unseen. The sight struck him harder than expected. There was warmth there, not manufactured, not forced. Real. He cleared his throat and they looked up. Clarabelle smiled only slightly, but enough. "You're back early," she said. Lucan nodded, then looked at Evie. "You okay?" Evie shrugged. "I'm not sketching machines anymore." Lucan arched a brow. She flipped the page. There, in pencil and ink, was a table. 3 figures sat at it, a tall man with a kind face, a boy with wild curls, and a woman with soft eyes, and in the center, a girl with her head tilted back in laughter. Lucan blinked. Clarabelle swallowed hard. Evie said simply, "That's how I hear the machines now." Later, after Noah had gone home with a neighbor, and Evie was organizing the old IT manuals by color, Clarabelle found Lucan in the alley behind the bar. He was leaning against the wall, eyes skyward, watching clouds roll past the edges of the fading sunset. "Do you always disappear at golden hour?" she asked. Lucan smiled. "Only when I need to remember." Clarabelle stepped beside him. "Remember what?" He took a long breath. "That life goes on, that the world keeps turning, even when we think it shouldn't." She nodded slowly. "I forgot that for a long time." Lucan turned his head toward her. "What made you remember?" Clarabelle was quiet for a beat. Then, "A girl who hears systems in silence, and a man who stopped talking, but never stopped seeing." Lucan looked away, unsettled in a way he didn't hate. Clarabelle continued, her voice softer now. "You know, I used to be scared of quiet." "I know," he said. "You used to fill it with meetings and directives and noise, and you used to disappear into it." He smiled again. "Maybe that's why we worked briefly. Clarabelle hesitated. "Do you think we could work again?" Quietly, the question lingered. Lucan didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. She was still standing beside him when the stars began to show. That night, as Lucan locked up, the hollow Evie paused at the door. She turned back and looked at the two adults behind her, Clarabelle sipping coffee, Lucan wiping down the counter. "You know she said you two are starting to sound like code when it's finally written right." Lucan grinned. "That good, huh?" Evie nodded. "No errors, just harmony." Clarabelle and Lucan exchanged a glance. Not romantic. Not yet. But full of possibility. And in that possibility, like in every perfect line of code, there was something powerful. Hope. Clarabelle hadn't planned to stay the week. She'd told herself she would fly and assess the system failure, maybe salvage a bit of PR goodwill, and leave. That was how she operated. In and out. Fast, efficient, clean. But now it was Thursday morning, and she was still in Dustwell. Still waking up in a sunlit room above the bar. Still pouring her own coffee in the quiet kitchen. Still watching Evie and Lucan out of the corner of her eye, and wondering what the hell had shifted inside her. She didn't recognize herself in these still moments. The Clarabelle Vance of Silicon Valley wouldn't have been caught dead folding dish towels or teaching a 10-year-old how to budget with crayons and a grocery flyer. And yet here she was, still, present, listening. That part frightened her most of all. Downstairs, Lucan was already at work, humming a tune as he wiped down the counters. The old jukebox in the corner had finally been repaired by Evie naturally, and it now played a crackling blend of 70s soft rock and ambient cafe jazz. Clarabelle stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. There was something in the way he moved, methodical, unhurried, as if every action had weight, but no rush. It was grounding, comforting even. "Morning," he said without looking up. She stepped in holding 2 mugs. "Thought you might want company." Lucan glanced at her, smiling. "This early?" "That's new. I'm evolving," she replied, handing him a cup. He took it, sipped. Still dark roast. Still no cream." She shrugged. "Some things don't change." He tilted his head. Some things shouldn't. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was companionable. Shared. Clarabelle hadn't had that in years. Evie arrived an hour later, riding on a burst of wind and late morning energy. Her hoodie was streaked with chalk dust from the community center sidewalk, where she'd apparently spent the morning drawing an intricate flowchart diagram titled "Trust as a Security Layer." She dropped her sketch pad on the bar. "Noah said he's bringing me his old Raspberry Pi tomorrow. I told him we're going to build a bot that recites bad poetry every time someone lies." Lucan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds both brilliant and terrifying." Clarabelle laughed, actually laughed, and Evie grinned, proud of the reaction. But then the energy shifted. A knock at the front door. Lucan moved to answer it, and returned with a tall woman in a beige coat and large glasses, accompanied by a man in an ill-fitting suit. Social services. Clarabelle stiffened before they even spoke. The woman introduced herself gently, explaining that someone in town had reported a young girl seen sleeping at the bar on multiple nights. No accusations, just concern. Evie stood still as stone. Clarabelle stepped forward before Lucan could. "She's not unsupervised," she said firmly. "She's under my protection." Lucan blinked. Evie looked up, startled. The woman from social services hesitated. "And you are Clarabelle Vance, CEO of the Hollows parent company." She folded her arms. "Evie Quinn is under our mentorship and care. She's an intern part of a long-term pilot program approved." She paused as of this morning. Lucan almost smiled. Evie's lip twitched. The woman frowned, uncertain. "Do you have documentation?" Clarabelle opened her tablet. Within seconds, she had drafted a letter of intent, a mentorship contract, and a placement outline complete with a fabricated timestamp. Lucan watched her work, both impressed and unsettled by how quickly she could rewire reality. The officials left shortly after, still skeptical, but satisfied for the moment. When the door clicked shut behind them, Clarabelle turned to face Evie. "You're safe," she said. Evie's voice was small. "You didn't have to lie for me." "I didn't lie," Clarabelle said softly. "I told the truth, just a little ahead of time." Evie stared at her, something breaking open in her face, something quiet and raw and childlike. Then she turned and ran out the back door. Lucan found her 15 minutes later sitting on the loading dock behind the kitchen, knees pulled up to her chest. "She didn't have to do that," Evie said, staring at the pavement. "No," Lucan agreed, sitting beside her. "She didn't." Evie swallowed. "People don't usually choose me." Lucan was quiet for a moment. "You've always chosen yourself, haven't you?" She nodded. He leaned back, arms resting on his knees. "That's brave, but exhausting." Evie sniffed. "Feels like the only way." Lucan tilted his head toward her. "Maybe now it's not." They sat in silence for a while. The wind had picked up again, rustling through the fence. Then Evie reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "She gave me this. A scholarship thing. Said it was optional." Lucan took it, skimmed. The offer was real, prestigious, and would take her out of Dustwell for 6 months. "She said I could say no," Evie whispered. "But if I stay, I'll ruin everything." Lucan looked at her gently. "You're not ruinous, Evie. You're just powerful. Sometimes people don't know how to hold that." Evie bit her lip. "Do you?" He met her gaze. "I'm learning." That evening, Clarabelle sat in the upstairs office, staring at the scholarship folder still open on her desk. Her hands were trembling slightly, something she hadn't felt in years. Lucan knocked once, then stepped in. "She's still thinking," he said. Clarabelle nodded. "I saw the way you stood up for her today," he added. "Didn't think you had that in you anymore." Clarabelle exhaled slowly. "Neither did I." Lucan leaned against the doorframe. "You're not the woman I used to work with." She glanced at him. "Is that a good thing?" He smiled, soft and sure. "It's the best thing." She looked down. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lucan. You don't have to. Just stay in the quiet." Clarabelle looked up, eyes damp. "I don't think I ever knew how." Lucan stepped closer. "Then let's figure it out. Together." Downstairs, Evie opened her sketchbook to a new page. She didn't draw code this time. Or machines. She drew a porch light burning against a dark sky. And beneath it, 3 silhouettes, imperfect, uneven, but close. And still, by the time Friday dawned, Dustwell no longer felt like a place forgotten. Something had shifted. The story had leaked. It started as a whisper. A local tech blog published a piece titled "The Girl Who Saved the Hollow," describing in half-accurate terms how a child prodigy had quietly prevented a major cyber attack. By noon, it had been picked up by 2 industry newsletters. By sunset, a reporter from a national outlet was calling the Hollow's main line. Clarabelle silenced her phone. Lucan unplugged the landline. Evie just stared at the ceiling in silence. She wasn't smiling, not even close. The story should have been a victory. For Evie. For all of them. But that evening, as they sat around a small table near the front window, the air felt heavier than celebration. Clarabelle was scrolling through a list of unanswered interview requests. Lucan had his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he hadn't touched. Evie had her hoodie pulled up, face shadowed. "This isn't what I wanted," she said, finally. Lucan looked up. "We didn't ask for it." Evie shook her head. "I didn't do it for this." Clarabelle gently set her phone down. "I know." Evie's voice was small. "They're going to want to see me. Use me. Make me into something." Clarabelle hesitated. "Not if we protect you." Evie met her eyes, sharp and tired. You can't protect me from attention. Lucan leaned forward. Maybe not. But we can protect you from being defined by it. That seemed to land. Evie sank deeper into her seat, curling around her thoughts like they were too sharp to touch. The next morning brought more attention. A tech foundation emailed a formal offer, full scholarship, national mentorship housing in San Francisco, personal interviews with venture investors. The works. Clarabelle sat alone in her office rereading the message. The weight of it pressed hard on her chest. Lucan entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You saw it. She nodded. I did. He handed her a mug and sat across from her. They didn't speak right away. Finally, he said, You're not the same woman who would have forwarded that email 2 years ago without blinking. Clarabelle stared at the screen. No. But I don't know what this version of me is supposed to do. Lucan leaned back, watching her. Do you believe she's extraordinary? Of course. And do you believe she needs more than this town can give her? Clarabelle didn't answer. Lucan continued gently. The question isn't whether she should go. It's whether we can let her without making her feel like she's leaving something behind. Clarabelle's voice cracked just slightly. I don't want to be another person who abandons her. You wouldn't be, Lucan said. You'd be the person who believed in her enough to let her choose. Evie didn't talk about the offer right away. She walked the town with Noah that afternoon, eating cherry slushies and sketching logos for their fake poetry bot company. She didn't mention the news stories, or the emails, or the door that had suddenly cracked open to a world that once ignored her. But that night, as the sky turned silver and the lights dimmed, she approached Clarabelle. I don't want to be a product, she said simply. Clarabelle looked up from her laptop. You're not. They'll try to make me one. Yes, Clarabelle admitted, but they won't succeed, because you know better. And you have a voice now. Evie studied her. Clarabelle stepped closer. You told the machines what to do. You can tell people too. Evie swallowed. What if I want to stay? Clarabelle's face softened. Then we'll make that happen. Whatever you choose, stay. Go build something right here, I'll back you. Evie blinked. Even if it's messy, Clarabelle smiled. Especially if it's messy. Later, Lucan found Evie sitting on the back steps, her laptop beside her stars overhead. Did you read it? He asked. The offer. She nodded. Yeah. He waited. She said nothing more. Lucan sat down beside her. When I was your age, I was already breaking into networks I shouldn't have even known existed. Thought I was the smartest person in every room. Maybe I was. Didn't mean I knew what I needed. Evie looked at him quiet. You know what I wish someone had told me back then, he asked. What if that brilliance doesn't need to be proven to be real? It just needs to be protected long enough to become wisdom. Evie looked down at her feet. Is that what you're doing? Protecting me? Lucan nodded. As best I can. Evie's voice cracked just a little. I don't know how to do anything without armor. You'll learn, he said. Not because you have to, but because you'll want to. That night before locking up, Clarabelle walked past Evie's booth and paused. A note had been left on the counter, folded neatly in thirds. She opened it. It was a list, written in a careful looping hand. Things I'm afraid of. 1. Becoming someone I don't recognize. 2. Forgetting how to listen. 3. Loving people who don't stay. At the bottom, one final line. But maybe it's worth trying. EQ. Clarabelle stood there a long time, the paper trembling in her hand. Then she walked outside into the cool night air, where Lucan stood beside the old porch railing, looking toward the hills. She's thinking about leaving, she said. Lucan nodded. I don't want her to go, she admitted. I know. I feel like I just found her. Lucan turned toward her. Some things are worth finding, even if we can't keep them. Clarabelle's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm tired of losing. Lucan stepped closer, then stopped seeing it as loss. She looked at him, eyes searching. He held her gaze steady and unflinching. Let it be a beginning. The first truly warm evening of the season arrived quietly, as if not wanting to startle anyone. The scent of sun-warmed wood drifted off the beams of the hollow, and for the first time in weeks, the town felt like it might be able to breathe again. The lights inside the bar were low, the chatter soft, the rhythm of life calm, even peaceful. Lucan stood at the edge of the outdoor deck, a quiet glass of iced tea in his hand, staring into the orange-blue horizon that wrapped around Dustwell like an old denim jacket. He liked this time of day, not quite over, not quite beginning. Behind him, the sliding door opened with a faint hiss. Clarabelle stepped outside. She wasn't in her blazer. Not tonight. Just jeans and a light sweater. Her hair was looser soft around her shoulders, catching the light like it remembered how to reflect it. Lucan looked over his shoulder. Didn't expect you to stay this late? She smiled, small but real. Didn't expect to want to. They stood there a moment in the hush, listening to the slow turn of the wind. From inside, faint laughter rose from Evie and Noah's new project, a poetry bot with terrible rhymes and a delightfully chaotic sense of timing. Lucan took a sip, then spoke. She's going to leave. Clarabelle nodded. I think so. And you're still okay with that? Clarabelle looked at him. No, but I'm learning to be. Lucan studied her carefully, the edges of his voice softening. You're not the woman I knew in D.C. I'm not even the woman I knew a month ago, she said. They both smiled. Then slowly, Clarabelle walked to the railing and leaned against it beside him. I was wrong about you, she said after a while. Lucan raised an eyebrow. You'll need to be more specific. Clarabelle smirked, then her voice grew serious. I thought you ran because you were tired. Weak. I thought the fire went out. It did, Lucan said. For a while. What brought it back, Lucan looked into the distance, then answered simply, a girl who hears machines, a woman who stopped filling every silence, and a town that didn't expect anything from me except presence. Clarabelle let the words settle between them. Then she turned, slightly facing him. When you left that night, years ago, I wanted to chase you, but I didn't. Lucan's jaw tightened. I told myself you weren't worth chasing, she continued. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared I'd have to feel something real, that I'd have to stop hiding behind my calendar and my forecasts. He turned to her. You weren't ready. No, she admitted. But I am now. Lucan's eyes softened, something old in him, giving way to something new. I never stopped caring, he said. Clarabelle stepped closer. Then why did you leave? He exhaled slowly, a breath, held for too many years. Because I couldn't save her my wife, and I didn't know how to live with that failure, and still love someone else. Clarabelle's eyes glistened. You've been punishing yourself. I thought it was penance, he whispered. But maybe it was just fear. She reached out her fingers, brushing his. It was the smallest touch, and yet it shook the quiet between them like thunder. Lucan looked down at their hands. What happens now? Clarabelle's voice was soft, but sure. Now, we begin again. Slowly. Honestly. Without pretending we're not afraid. Lucan nodded. No more disappearing. She smiled. No more armor. And then, after years of circling around what was too tender to touch their lips, met. Not urgently. Not desperately. But with the reverence of two people who had been through fire and frost, and found against the odds something still soft inside themselves. Inside the bar, Evie sat at the counter, legs swinging, watching through the window. She didn't interrupt. She didn't tease. She just smiled a little crooked, a little sad, and very, very proud. Because even a girl who hears machines knows when something fragile has finally clicked into place. Later that night, Lucan walked Clarabelle home through the quiet town. The streets were empty, the stars overhead sharp and vivid in the country dark. As they reached the stairs of her room above the bar, she stopped and turned to him. "I'm not good at this," she admitted. "At soft things. At staying." Lucan took her hand. "You don't have to be good at it. You just have to show up." Clarabelle looked down at their joined hands, then back up. "Then I'm showing up." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently to hers. "And I'll be here." They stood like that for a long moment. No promises of forever, no illusions of easy. Just two people agreeing silently to stop running from the good. In her room, Clarabelle pulled out a folder. Evie's scholarship acceptance sat at the top. She placed a yellow sticky note on it. "Only if you want it. I'll never stop backing you." See. Then she set it on the girl's usual booth, where she knew Evie would find it in the morning. And she turned off the light, knowing the truest kind of love wasn't control or protection or even understanding. It was belief. Quiet, unwavering belief that someone would find their way. Morning light spilled into the hollow like honey golden, slow, deliberate. Evie sat alone at the corner booth, her sketch pad open, but untouched. The scholarship folder rested beside her, Clarabelle's yellow note on top, now slightly curled at the edges. She'd read it 5 times, maybe more. "Only if you want it. I'll never stop backing you." See, no pressure, no manipulation, no guilt, just belief. That more than any award or badge or title was the thing she didn't know how to hold. Lucan approached quietly, placing a steaming mug of hot cocoa beside her. "Extra marshmallows," he said, sitting down. "Don't ask how many." Evie smirked faintly. "Thanks." They sat in companionable silence, the kind that comes when words would only get in the way. After a few moments, Evie asked, "Were you scared when you became a dad?" Lucan blinked. "Absolutely. I mean, did you ever think you'd screw it up?" Lucan chuckled softly. "Every day. Still do." Evie looked at him. "But you kept trying, because he deserved that," Lucan said. "And eventually, I realized—" "So did I." Evie stared down at the cocoa. "What if I mess this up?" Lucan leaned forward. "Then you'll learn. That's how brilliance works. It stumbles before it flies." By midday, the bar was closed for a private community event, though no one seemed to know what that meant. Clarabelle paced the back office, biting the edge of her nail, a habit she thought she'd long outgrown. Lucan stepped in, holding a small cardboard box. "What's that?" she asked. He opened the lid. Inside, a set of custom-labeled notebooks, each with a circuit pattern cover, and Evie's name etched on the spine. "Evie's startup kit," Lucan said, grinning. "We figured, if she's going to create a revolution, she might as well have a head start." Clarabelle blinked back, sudden tears. "You're going to make me cry in a supply closet. I'm talented like that." She laughed, stepped closer. "You're also really something, Lucan Reed." He met her gaze. "You bring it out of me." Their kiss this time was quieter, less about the storm, more about the shelter. At 4:00 p.m., Clarabelle called everyone to the main floor. Evie stood in front of a whiteboard that read, "Evie's Big Decision, a.k.a. Don't Freak Out." Clarabelle, Lucan, Noah, a few of the regulars, and even a surprised mailman took seats around the room. Evie held up a small hand-built device, a light-up box, with 2 buttons, stay and go. "I wrote an algorithm," she said, half joking, half terrified, "that tracks the heart rate, sweat levels, and speech patterns of everyone I trust. When I ask the question, should I stay or go?" The room laughed gently, but the tension under it was real. She smiled. "But I didn't need to run it." Evie walked up to Clarabelle, placed the scholarship folder back in her hands, and whispered, "Later." "Not now." Clarabelle's eyes brimmed, but she nodded. No speech, just a proud, silent hug. Evie turned to the others. "I want to build something here first. Something that belongs to us." Lucan grinned. "What do you have in mind?" Evie pointed to the corner of the room. "The old game room. I want to turn it into a tech lab. For local kids. For veterans. For anyone who wants to learn how to speak machine." Clarabelle stepped forward. "You've got seed funding," Lucan added. "And a building permit." Noah raised his hand. "I can bring snacks." Evie beamed. "Perfect." Later that evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, the town gathered under strings of warm light to celebrate not just Evie's choice, but who she'd become. A girl, once invisible, once dismissed as just a janitor's kid, now stood in the center of a room filled with people who saw her, really saw her, not as a symbol, not as a prodigy, but as Evie Quinn, wild-hearted, sharp-minded, and absolutely unapologetically here. As the crowd dwindled and the stars blinked to life, Lucan found Clarabelle leaning against the porch railing. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just watching." "She chose her own path," he said. "She did," Clarabelle replied. "But she didn't walk it alone." Lucan looked at her. "Neither did you." Clarabelle turned, meeting his gaze. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked. She placed it in his hands. "The startup paperwork. For the nonprofit." "You're listed as co-founder?" Lucan opened the flap and read the name, Whispers in the code. "I Center for Hidden Genius." His voice caught. "You named it after her." Clarabelle nodded. "And for people like her. People like you. People who just need a place to be heard." Lucan slipped the envelope into his pocket. "You really think this little town is ready for a tech revolution?" Clarabelle leaned closer. "I think this little town is the revolution." Back inside, Evie sat alone at her booth, her sketch pad filled with a new design. Not code, not circuits, but a blueprint for a building. A place that looked like the Hollow, but had solar panels, adaptive learning terminals, even a therapy dog station. She titled the page, "Not a Lab, a Home." Then she added in small cursive along the top edge, for those who were never chosen, but changed everything anyway. 6 months later, Dustwell had changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but undeniably. Where the old arcade once sat dark and unused, a new space shimmered to life every morning. The Whispers Center, a community tech lab painted in warm desert tones, with handmade signs, mismatched couches, and Wi-Fi that actually worked. Kids came after school. Veterans came on Saturdays. A local grandmother came every Wednesday to learn how to use email, her progress, tracked affectionately on a bulletin board, titled Code and Courage. And at the center of it all, barefoot on a spinning chair, was Evie. She didn't go to San Francisco. Not yet. Instead, she built a world where someone like her wouldn't feel invisible, a space where brilliance didn't have to dress up in prestige to be seen. Lucan taught basic coding classes twice a week and spent the rest of his time building an open-source firewall modeled on Evie's old junkyard box, now affectionately named the Sentinel. It was being tested in 4 local towns. Clarabelle, now president of the Whispers Foundation, balanced her spreadsheets with morning deliveries of donuts and side-eye at anyone who called her ma'am. They were no longer just surviving. They were building. Together. One quiet afternoon, Evie stood alone in the center of the lab, hands in her pockets, eyes scanning the space she'd once drawn on the back of a napkin. Lucan stepped in, brushing sawdust from his hands. "You okay?" Evie nodded. "Just watching." Lucan tilted his head. "You've gotten taller." She rolled her eyes. "Barely. Feels like Maury said. Like your shadow's grown too." Evie turned toward him, something unsure fluttering in her voice. What if I'm not done changing? Lucan smiled. Good. That's the point. Evie hesitated. They sent another offer. New York this time. Lucan kept his expression calm. And I'm thinking about it. He nodded. Then think. Don't rush. And if you go, you know where home is. Evie's eyes softened. I do. Meanwhile, Clarabelle stood on the back porch of the Hollow, coffee in hand, watching the sky melt from pale blue to soft coral. She heard footsteps and didn't need to turn to know it was him. Lucan wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. You know, he murmured, I never thought I'd fall in love on a porch that smells like burnt fries and old bourbon. She laughed. And yet, here we are. They watched the horizon for a long moment. Then Clarabelle whispered, I never thought I'd be happy again. Lucan kissed her temple. You didn't just find happiness, Clarabelle. You built it. Later that night, they hosted their first annual Night of Sparks, a celebration of every soul who dared to believe in something more. Evie unveiled a mural painted by local teens, a collage of gears, poetry fingerprints, and stars. At the center, a girl with copper wire hair held a lantern made of code, her light pouring across the wall in soft, glimmering lines. Underneath a quote, Some of us don't wait to be chosen. We choose ourselves, and then we make room for others. Everyone clapped. Evie smiled. Clarabelle cried. Lucan tried not to. After the guests had gone and the last paper lanterns were folded away, Evie, Lucan, and Clarabelle sat together under the darkened sky. Think we'll always be here? Evie asked. Clarabelle shook her head. No, Lucan added, but parts of us will be. Evie looked at them both. I used to think being seen was the goal, but maybe being understood is better. Clarabelle reached over and took her hand. You're not a story people read once and forget. You're one they keep coming back to. Evie didn't say anything. She just leaned her head on Clarabelle's shoulder, closed her eyes, and breathed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply home. Epilogue. 3 years later. A small plaque hangs at the front of the Whispers Center, founded by a girl who once begged for leftovers, who left, returned, and left again. Not because she didn't love this place, but because this place taught her how to love the world. The girl's name is now in textbooks, her programs run on school laptops across the country, and her code still lives in the Sentinel humming quietly in every dusty, determined corner of towns like Dustwell. But if you walk into the Hollow on a Friday night, you'll still find an empty booth with her name etched underneath in messy pen, because some kinds of brilliance don't disappear. They echo, softly, like a whisper in the code. This story may have come to an end, but the echo of Evie's quiet brilliance, the steady kindness of Lucan, and the courage of Clarabelle will stay with us long after the screen fades to black. Sometimes it takes just one person who stops, one soul who believes, and a moment of unexpected connection to turn the world right side up again. If their journey touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from, or simply share what part of this story stayed with you. And if you believe like we do, that compassion can spark miracles, subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories like this, quiet, powerful, and real, waiting to be told. From all of us here, thank you for being part of something human, something true. You are seen, you are valued, and you are never too small to make a difference.